Welcome to our Zoom room. Nice to see so many familiar faces, loving friends and colleagues. I see people from all around the country and around the world. I'm going to give it another few seconds as people are getting situated and finding their way into the Zoom room. Okay. So welcome again to NIFers from around the country and the world. I'm Libby Kinski, Vice President for Public Engagement here at New Israel Fund. And we're gathering not for a webinar, because we're not here to deliver a briefing or give information, but to commemorate a year since the horrible attack on October 7th. We thought it would be meaningful for ourselves, honestly, and for you to be together in this room on this 1-year anniversary. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sticking together this year. Our NIF community has held together. We've grown. There are new people here for whom this was the first year of involvement with NIF, and people who have been around since the beginning. Hi, Johnny. For me, this anniversary, the feeling of this anniversary really snuck up on me. And I sort of found myself this morning unable to believe that it's actually been a year. And so before I turn it over to our dear CEO, Daniel Sokach, to open our conversation, and before I introduce our two speakers, Rabbi Avi Dabush and Dr. Yasmeen Fraiha, who coincidentally, but who were also with us a year ago when we first convened our community after the attack. Before I turn over my mic, as it were, to Daniel, I wanted to give us a moment of silence to commemorate all the lives lost and to recommit to fighting for those still living. So for that, I want to give a moment of silence, and then I'll hand it over to Daniel. Okay. I'm going to hand it over to Daniel to give some opening remarks. And I'll just say that as I've been reflecting about the year that we've been through, I've been at NIF for 14 years, and I was a grantee for almost 10 years before that. And I've never been prouder or more committed to our organization and our mission. And an enormous part of that is because of Daniel's steadfast leadership, reminding us always of our core values, even in the times when it was hardest to hold on to those. So I thank you, and I turn the mic over to you for opening remarks.
Thanks, Libby. It's, as Libby said, it's so good to see you all, so many old friends. I'd love to acknowledge so many of you, but we'd be here all day. Over 700 people signed up for this conversation, and people are still coming on now. And I'm really heartened to see so many of you. As Libby said, the reason why we wanted to ask Yasmeen and Avi to join us today is because many of you will remember that it was the four of us who were in conversation with hundreds of you just a couple of days after that awful Saturday. And I'll add, I know Libby will go into this in more detail when she introduces them, but Avi, who is now the leader of one of our precious grantee organizations, used to work at NIF. And Yasmeen, who, as many of you may recall, was in her hospital, Soroka, where she was a doctor on October 7th, treating people, is a board member of the New Israel Fund. And in fact, just last week in New York was elected to be an officer of the board. So even in these bleak and dark days, I'm proud that we can boast that kind of leadership, both in terms of our alumni at NIF and our rising leadership at NIF. So we're so honored to be together again to talk with you all about how things feel to all of us a year later. It's obviously a very hard day, a very awful and hard way to start a new year. Like many of you, I'm sure, who are not in Israel on this call, I was in touch with my family in Israel this morning. One of them is joining the webinar. Two of them are in the Army Reserves right now. So this is obviously not a unique experience for my family. We have people who are NIFE, Israelis who are our backbone in Israel, who are also who feel as we do about so many of the things that are happening in Gaza, in the region, in Israel with the government, but who are still called to serve at a time like this. So it's just a very complex and challenging day for us. And of course, on this really bleak anniversary, 101 hostages remain in Gaza. Civilians are killed every day in seemingly never-ending war in Gaza, and now a new war in Lebanon. The threat of a wider war, one that looks to be between primarily Iran and Israel, has never been greater. The threat of that kind of regional escalation is never been greater, and there are real implications. We don't know whether or not they will come to pass, but real implications for Israel, for the Palestinians, for the region, for us, for the United States, for the world. A year after the horror of October 7th, Israel is led still by a government that shows no interest in a ceasefire or a hostage deal. And that, in fact, under the cover of the fog of war, has reanimated much of the anti-democratic agenda that characterized the first part of 2023. And that same government is moving now to further de facto annex in the West Bank, which itself is now close to the boiling point. And of course, we're 1 month out from what really may be the most momentous U.S. election in our lifetimes, with implications not only for our own country, for the United States' place in the world, for the world order, but of course for what's happening in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in the region. So these are truly very difficult and, at least for me, very scary times. But, you've all heard me say this before. These really are the times that New Israel Fund was built for. And you, our international community of supporters, you've ensured that at what is probably the worst moment in Israel's history, and certainly for many of the values and the vision for Israel that we all share, you've ensured that at that moment, NIF is operating from the position of its greatest strength in our history, which enables us to respond to the cascading catastrophes that we've seen over the last 22 months or so. Because while for many people who don't watch these things and feel them as closely as the folks on this webinar, the way that we all do, it feels like the emergency really began a year ago today. But we know that that's not the case. And that for almost the last 2 years, Israel has been in the throes of three connected, and in fact, they're distinct, but they're connected, cascading crises. First, starting with as it's described in the Israeli media, the democracy coup, the attack on democracy that Benjamin Netanyahu's extremist hardline government enacted as soon as they came into power in January of 2023. So while this sort of took a pause during the earliest months after October 7th, it has resumed. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So the crisis in democracy was the first of the crises that defined 2023 in Israel. And of course, we remember everyone from the defense minister on down in the defense establishment and in the intelligence establishment, security establishment, warning the government that an Israel that appeared so divided internally, that seemed to be abandoning fundaments of democratic process internally, was extraordinarily vulnerable externally. And of course, that dark prophecy was proved correct on October 7th, the second of the enormous crises that have racked Israel and the region over the last couple of years. And then the wars that have followed in October 7th's wake, in the wake of the massacre of 1,200 people and hundreds of hostages dragged back to Gaza, we now are in the midst of wars on most of Israel's fronts that, as I said earlier, threaten to expand even farther, and they have continued to expand since October 7th. And that has not only created the situation that we see in the region, that situation of crisis, instability, and endless death and horror, but it's also adversely impacted Israel's standing and reputation in the world. And then that's not even looking at what that's meant for those of us who don't live in Israel, for Jews in the diaspora and Muslims, frankly, in the diaspora, Palestinians in the diaspora, who have felt the reverberations of that crisis in a very personal way over the last year. I have two kids, one just graduated in May, but for most of since October 7th, for most of that year, I had two kids on a liberal college campus. And while I think that many of the reports that we read were specific to those campuses, and I wouldn't describe the situation on college campuses as quite as horrible for Jewish students as we sometimes read in the press, it really has been a terrible challenge for many of them. And my own girls have had to struggle with what it means to be Jewish and connected to Israel at a time like this, in an atmosphere that has resulted from the events over the last year. And again, that's without even going into other issues about the rise of anti-Semitism, how many of us feel about the way the left in America and beyond has responded or not responded. The point I'm making is, of course, the events of the last 22 months in Israel, but especially the last 12, have been landscape altering. It has been a seismic shift in the reality for people in the region and far beyond the region. And this may sound counterintuitive, but when I have felt the onset of despair, which is not a natural emotion for me to feel, the thing that has given me the most hope when hopelessness seems to creep into the way I'm thinking about things is actually getting to Israel and Palestine and working with NIF staff and grantees on the ground, watching them as they do what they do every day, regardless of the challenges, despite the pain and the horror and the grieving and the sorrow and the odds, which is they roll up their sleeves and they get to work trying to build a better future for everyone, for Israelis, Arab and Jewish, and for Palestinians, and for the region. Now, in a moment, we'll hear from Yasmeen and Avi, two of the people who give me this kind of hope. But now just a quick reminder of the other thing that gives me hope, which is frankly us, you and us, and those grantees, and that New Israel Fund community on the ground in Israel. Because, from October 7th on, the New Israel Fund has been there in a way that has exceeded even my extraordinarily high expectations for our work on the ground and our community internationally. Right after October 7th, we enacted, in the days after October 7th. In fact, I remember sitting at my kitchen table talking with you, Libby, on that awful day, and then Mickey in Israel about what our response was going to be. So even as the terror was unfolding, New Israel Fund was thinking, how do we help? And the first thing that we did was something that is not unique in our history. It's happened on a few occasions. But it's that we turned to providing what we call at NIF humanitarian response. Again, that's not normally what we do. I always love to characterize NIF when people try to ask me, what is it exactly that your organizations do? I tell them the old Union story about the two people walking by a river and they see babies floating down the river and they wade in and they pull out the babies that keep floating down the river. And finally, one of the companions gets up and she starts walking upstream. And her friend says, where are you going? The babies are still coming down the river. And she says, well, you keep taking the babies out. I'm going upstream to stop whoever's putting them in there. And for most of my time at NIF, we have been the second friend, walking upstream to figure out how to stop the systemic and societal problems, how to alter the reality in Israel in such a way that the effects can be felt downstream, so that no one's putting babies in the water anymore, and then we don't have to pull them out. But this was a time when we actually needed to be providing direct social services or humanitarian services for a brief period as an Israeli government that had been caught completely by surprise. That had ignored the warning signs that its own military and security folks had been telling it about what was happening in Gaza. They also were very slow in responding to the disaster. And that mighty civil society reaction that we saw to the attack on democracy turned on a dime, or on a shekel, to be able to confront the humanitarian crisis that was wrought by the terror attacks on October 7th. And so New Israel Fund found ourselves in the non-traditional position. We haven't really done this since the Second Lebanon War, which was before my time. We did some of it during COVID, but we were buying hotel rooms for people who were evacuated from their communities in cities like Ofakim, not exactly an NIF heartland city, near Gaza. We were supporting kibbutznikim and Bedouin villagers whose homes were destroyed, who lost loved ones, who themselves may have been injured. We provided medical care. We provided iPads for Bedouin kids whose school had been destroyed, who were evacuated out of the Western Negev. We supported we supported folks who, no matter who they were, where they came from, who needed help. We also moved quickly to try to change the reality on the ground, supporting grantees who went to the High Court of Justice and secured a ruling from the High Court that the government of Israel could no longer describe the area of the Western Negev, where unrecognized Bedouin villages and communities existed, as an unpopulated area. Why? Because when they were allowed to call it unpopulated, despite the fact that there were tens of thousands of Bedouin citizens of the state of Israel living in that territory, they were able to not provide bomb shelters and Iron Dome missile defense security. So the court ruled that the state must consider that area a populated area and provide those kinds of things. We worked to support the Hostage Families Forum. We were the earliest and most significant early supporter of that forum. When last summer we presented our second annual Truth to Power Award in memory of our beloved late board member Bill Goldman, we gave that award this year to Einav Zangauker, the mother of a hostage in Gaza, who herself, a lifelong Bibi supporter, as she described herself to me, who came to see, because of the government's lack of response, when she realized that they really weren't looking for a hostage deal, they weren't looking for a ceasefire. She not only became a leader of the protest movement for a ceasefire and return to the hostages, but she became one of the most vocal and visible and effective critics of Netanyahu's government. She, as she said to me, this revealed to her the truth of who these people were and where they were leading Israel. And her heroic public position has earned her the scorn, derision, and threats of the Bibi, Smotrich, Ben Gvir community, which is precisely why we honored her. We also worked to avoid a repeat of May 2021. Now, you all will remember that the last fighting between Hamas and Israel and the IDF occurred in May 2021. Of course, it was a different order of magnitude than what's happened now. But what happened then was that for the first time since 1948-49, intercommunal violence erupted in the wake of the Hamas IDF fighting between Arab and Jewish citizens of Israel in many of the mixed cities like Lod and Ramla in Israel. Now, for me and for NIF, this was perhaps the most terrifying specter, the worst thing that we've worried about, an Israel that comes apart at its own internal seams. And so after May 2021, we tripled down on support for efforts to build bridges between Arab and Jewish citizens of Israel, to build bridges between those united citizens groups and their municipalities and local authorities. And those efforts have really paid off. And I'm touching wood right now, not a very Jewish thing to do, but I hope you all feel very proud of this. Like, the counterfactual is not often a great way to be able to judge how things are going, but there has been thus far no significant intercommunal violence between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel, despite the worst moment in the history of Palestinian-Jewish relationships. And that is in no small part due to the efforts of NIF and Shatil and our astonishing grantee organizations who have worked to bring together those communities and avoid a descent into that kind of internal chaos. And that's an area that I think we should be very proud of. And then finally, in the wake of the war, we continued and enhanced the work of our grantees, shining a light and monitoring the de facto annexation that is taking place in the West Bank under the cover of the fog of war. And then, of course, in the next phase of our response, Shira Ben Sasson, one of our colleagues in Israel, a senior staff member in Israel, who herself was the spokeswoman for one of the hostages who grew up, an American kid, Hirsch, who many of you know, who grew up on her block in Jerusalem. She became the spokesperson for the family, Hirsch's family, over the last year. And even as she shouldered those burdens, running NIF in Israel, supporting Hirsch's family during this terrible time, which, as we know, ended so tragically, she called me right before Pesach and said, "Boss, I can't sleep knowing that because of this war, there are tens of thousands of kids in Gaza who are starving." And so New Israel Fund took upon itself for the first, we were the first organization in the American Jewish community, and still by far the most significant. We took upon ourselves an effort to raise funding to provide food aid into Gaza. We felt that this was in line with our own moral north, and you all stepped up, as did our supporters in Israel. And NIF to date has sent almost $1.5 million to World Central Kitchen and the International Rescue Committee in their efforts to feed starving people in Gaza. I'll add that our initial interlocutor at World Central Kitchen was one of the people killed in the airstrike, the Israeli airstrike, the accidental airstrike that killed a number of their workers. But we kept working with World Central Kitchen, and I'm very proud that NIF, in addition to the millions and millions of dollars that we've put on the field, onto the ground to respond to the terrors of October 7th, has also responded in our own modest way with food aid into Gaza. Now we're focusing on three major areas of response a year later, in addition to the critical work that we continue, which your generous support has enabled us to do, right? We haven't had to make terrible choices about what not to do because of the extraordinary generosity of our community. And though we're focusing now on three areas of response to what's happening on the ground. First, we're calling this our building and blocking plan. We are building large-scale public mobilization campaigns to put forward a different vision of the future, an alternative to the nightmare of endless war and domination presented by the Bibi Ben-Gvir Smotrich coalition. And here's where things are interesting, because what we see from data from people like Eran Halperin at ACORD and the Shikaki Scheinling polling that was just done a couple of weeks ago in Israel and Palestine, what the data shows is that while an overwhelming majority of Israeli Jews no longer support a two-state solution, something in the manner of between 21 and 25% of Israeli Jews say they support a two-state solution. When you ask Israeli Jews, would you support a regional agreement along the lines of the Biden plan, which would consist of components like rebuilding Gaza with Arab League and Western support, and a Gaza that ultimately is governed by a reformed Palestinian Authority, an Israel that formalizes security ties to the U.S. and the West, full diplomatic integration into the region with a peace treaty between Israel and Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Gulf states, and wait for it, the emergence of an independent Palestinian state under a reformed PA leadership. A clear majority, although a small one, of all Israeli Jews supports this, 53% in Halperin's data. When you ask Israelis who did not vote for the governing coalition. That is to say, what I call the MAGA Likud settler ultra-Orthodox coalition. When you talk to the plurality of Israelis who voted for other parties, that number rises to 70 and above 80% when you include Arab citizens of Israel, who, I want to add, in all this polling, are the people who sound closest to how many of us feel. That community, the Israeli Palestinian citizens of Israel, retain empathy for their fellow Israeli Jewish citizens. They retain empathy for their fellow Palestinians suffering horribly in Gaza and in the West Bank. They support a two-state solution. They support a regional agreement. They overwhelmingly support a ceasefire and a hostage return, and they overwhelmingly oppose the expanded regional war. So I look for some light in this darkness to where the Palestinian Israeli community is. Perhaps the most beleaguered community in Israel are the ones who, as I see it, have the clearest sense of what has to happen for things to get better. So we're working to put that vision, which a majority of Israelis support, into the public discourse through getting opposition politicians to talk openly and publicly about a position they support anyway, at trying to make that idea of supporting a regional agreement fundamental to the identity of being part of the democracy camp. So we're working on these kinds of major campaigns while at the same time blocking, that's the blocking part, moves by this government, as I said earlier, to engage in de facto annexation in the West Bank. And we're doing that by shining a light on what's happening, by doing a lot of external government work, identifying extremist settlers to the American and EU governments and pointing out that these people should not be able to come into Western countries any more than terrorists from other groups should be allowed to enter those countries, and by a protective presence campaign, supporting those Israelis who are going out into the West Bank to bear witness and to stand with Palestinians against what's happening under the cover of the fog of war. Finally, we have two other major programs that our board just a week and a half ago in New York voted to move forward. One is what we call comprehensive rehabilitation in the Western Negev. When Israel finally gets around to rebuilding what has been destroyed in the Western Negev, we want to ensure that we do everything we can to make sure that that is based on a different kind of model of a shared society, not just making sure that Bedouin citizens have bomb shelters and Iron Dome protection, but making sure that the kinds of efforts that we took after May 2021 to build bridges between Palestinian and Jewish citizens of Israel in the South are replicated and doubled down on and really invested in. And then we have what we call nasij, which means tapestry in Arabic. I hope, Yasmeen, that I got that right. And that is an effort that NIF has undertaken to turbocharge what we feel is one of the most important, but frankly, one of the most vulnerable and weakest parts of Israeli civil society, and that is Palestinian Israeli, Arab Israeli civil society. So we will work to build new leadership, to strengthen up-and-coming organizations who are taking on issues like violence in the Arab community in Israel, as well as the efforts for working for equality within larger Israeli society. And this is a major effort that complements our commitment to direct never less than 20% of our resources, roughly the population of Arab citizens of Israel, or their percentage in the community. We have taken upon ourselves a commitment to make sure that we never put less than 20% of our resources into the work led by organizations run by Palestinian citizens of Israel. The last thing I'll say before I hand it back to you, Libby, on this sad day, is that I'm also extremely proud and moved that that when it became clear that our beloved Vivian Silver, a former board member of New Israel Fund, a former leader of Ajik of Women Wage Peace, and a friend of many of you on this webinar, and a friend of mine, when her sons learned that she had been murdered on October 7th, for the first months we thought she was a hostage in Gaza, they asked NIF if we would house a prize that they wanted to build in Vivian's honor. Which every year will be given to a Jewish and a Palestinian woman who embody the values and the vision that Vivian stood for. And of course, We readily agreed. We are pleased to provide all the back office support for this to enable the boys to do this incredible project on behalf of their mom. And I just want to say that in addition to all of the other wonderful support that you all on this call have provided to NIF and our grantees over this last terrible period, if you want, let us know, because we would love to give you the opportunity to contribute to this incredible fund that is being built to make sure that Vivian's memory and her legacy are the ones that she would have been proud of. And in a way, I suppose, nothing in my 15 years at NIF has made me prouder than that call by Vivian's sons. Libby, back to you.
Thank you, Daniel. I hope that hearing about what NIF has done and will be doing is a source of pride for everyone on the call, as it is for me. I'm going to turn our focus to Avi and Yasmeen. I'll just introduce them both a little bit more fully and then get us started with a question. So Rabbi Avi Dabush is the Director General of Rabbis for Human Rights, the author of the book, The Periphery Rebellion, and a regular op-ed contributor for Haaretz and Israel Hayom newspapers. Avi was recently ordained as a rabbi at the Beit Midrash for Israeli Rabbis of the Shalom Hartman Institute. Dr. Yasmeen Abu Fraiha is a clinical fellow in critical care medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston and a research fellow at the Middle East Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School. As Daniel mentioned, we were all together a few days after the attack, and you were sharing your real life experiences, Avi from Kibbutz Re'im and Yasmeen from Soroka Medical Center. And it's been a year, and I want to ask you, and I'll also answer this myself after, what has changed for you in this past year, and what has stayed the same? Avi, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can try. So, hello everyone. As Libby and Daniel mentioned, this is a very hard day for a lot of us. We just started this day, my family, with getting the message of one of the hostages, Sidan Shtiwi, is a member of my family that now we know that he was killed actually in the first day a year ago on October 7th, but only now we know that for sure. And after that, we had our ceremony at Kibbutz Nirim, not Reim, at Kibbutz Nirim.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. And it's a very hard days for a lot of us. And as Daniel mentioned, it's not only October 7th and the days after, but this full year that becoming more and more violent, and in a lot of way, it's madness. We just talked about it, my wife and I, that it seems getting more and more severe. And what was changed, the first thing is that we lost our house. Today we were in Nirim, but we can't go back now. We don't know when we will allowed to go back, in terms of security and in terms of many houses that need to be demolished, that were burned and destroyed, and in terms of our community. I must say, in the terms of the community, we are talking about the larger community here, and I'm really proud, as Libby and Daniel mentioned, in what NIF is doing, and we are proud of it. But in terms of my community in Kibbutz Nirim, we were evacuated on the second day, on October 8th afternoon, to Eilat, and for 4 months we were in a hotel, the whole community together, with the people from Sderot and Ofakim and others that you mentioned. And around February, we moved ourselves as a community to Be'er Sheva. So right now we are in Be'er Sheva. It's sad, but funny that this is right now one of the kind of the safest places in Israel. Yesterday there was a terrorist attack in Beersheba, but generally it's not the north and it's not the Western Negev. So this is the first time that we ask or call our friends in the north to come here, to come to the south and be with us. And I'm really proud in my community and the attempts that we are doing to stick together as a community and as a region. And whoever knows the region, the Western Negev, it's very sad to be there right now, today, of course, but this last year, it's still really broken in so many ways. Another thing that was really changed in a way is that we understood very quickly that we must do much more in Rabbis for Human Rights and in all the arena of the civil society in Israel. Actually, we were trying all those years to work in coalition. I'm again part of the NIF philosophy. Coalitions, when we are talking about civil rights, we are talking about social justice and other coalitions. But from October 7th, we are trying harder, actually. In the first week that I was in Eilat, we had our first meeting of our staff and board, and we decided that we have to do more. It was really hard, of course, for everyone, but we understood that there are people that needs more support than we did, and we started by humanitarian work. This is really a thing that changed for us. We are a human rights organization and not a humanitarian organization, but our friends and partners in the West Bank, specifically the farmers, the mayors, the shepherds, said that they need really basic support, medical support and food, and we started with that. And after that, we did more and more in order to have a more protective presence in the West Bank. And actually, we got right now the support from NIF for that. We started in the Jordan Valley, in the North Jordan Valley, also with a lot of volunteers there. After that, in the South Hebron Hills, in East Jerusalem, and in the Nablus area. Actually, we are just right now we are working on our kind of biggest campaign every year is the olive harvest, and we should and we intend to start in this Thursday. Of course, we don't really know how it will come. It's a time that we don't know what the reality will be for each day and each moment, but we are very persistent in doing so, and this time doing that with a coalition. So this is really something that is different. Right now, we are doing much more in the West Bank. We are doing much more in interfaith work. Actually, I was a visitor of NIF in Australia in April, and it was really interesting. And I'm also hearing from my American friends that the interfaith project are collapsing. And it was really interesting for them to understand that in Israel we are doing much more because we and also our Muslim friends and the Christian friends understand that we have responsibility. And I can say for myself that I'm really hopeful. And I know, and Daniel talked about Vivian Silver's family and, Mao Zinon and other partners of us. We know that peace will come and we will have to find a way to live together. The question is, of course, how much time and how much blood will spill. So this is our role as leaders to have this time to be much to narrow this time gap in order to have a better future. And the last thing that I want to say in terms of my beliefs and feelings, I'm always saying, you know, I'm talking a lot with people in Nirim, in Sderot, in Beersheba, in other places, with young people in the pre-military academies, with students, with the reform movement. Yesterday I was with the reform movement in Sderot, and they keep asking about how your beliefs changed and how your values change. And I'm always saying that maybe my roadmap changed in a lot of specific details. I really pushed 10 years ago. I was establishing that the movement for the future of the Western Negev. And we really believe that we can have a diplomatic solution with the Palestinian Authority, of course, but also with Hamas. And maybe we should, but it didn't come to reality. And right now I can say that I really believe that the roadmap should change, and the new government in Gaza should be different and not Hamas-led government, in order for us and also the Palestinian, the people in Gaza can flourish and have a better life. But my values got really deeper. We understand now that this is the only way, the way of peace, of justice, of equality, of human rights. And actually, as a new rabbi and a leader of Rabbis for Human Rights, I can say really in a very deep and true way that the war outside is really frightened, of course, and it's hard times for us as our physical security is on stake. But the war on our values is even scarier, because if we are dropping and throwing all the Jewish culture and the morality, the universal morality, in order to have this kind of idea that only power can do something good in this region, and we should be more into Jewish supremacy and violence and Jewish terror. And unfortunately, of course, we can see and hear these streams from the government itself, from the Israeli government. It is much scarier for us, and it's like for me, this is the real war, and we have to be very strong. And this is a time that it's very hard to talk about those values. And this is our part, you know, in the Esther book in the Bible. It said that maybe this is the time that you about Esther, that you are becoming a queen for. You know, it's nice to be a queen or a CEO or anything that you are, but there are specific times in our life that we have a mission, and we have to be very clear. And sometimes, again, it's not with the stream, but it's against the stream. But this is the time that we were built for, NIF, our organization, and actually our partnership, all the people that are here. So I'm really thankful. I really believe, and this is hard time, but I believe that we can make the future looks better.
Amen. Thank you, Avi. And congratulations on becoming a rabbi. But as somebody who's known you for many, many years, you've always been a rabbi. You just now have the papers. So thank you. And thank you for continuing to be a powerful voice of holding the nuance and the both. And I think that the fact that your values got deeper and clearer meant that all of ours could. So thank you for that. Yasmeen, what about you? What has changed and what has stayed the same this year?
So I'm gonna first thank you so much first for the opportunity to speak to you and for being here and for supporting us in NIF. And I'm gonna start with what I think is the easy part, which is what stayed the same, because I feel like Avi did my work for me. Because I think the first thing that I always knew that people in the south of Israel, like the best people in the world, And Avi is just like a beautiful example of this. And I have to say, October 7th is an extremely difficult day for all of us. But it brings me back to my day in Soroka. And you know, a lot of things I feel like I kind of like pushed away and didn't want to remember in the past few months, and specifically few weeks, more and more it's coming back to me. And I remember more than it was a shock. It's not really a comparison, okay? But it was a shock for everyone, every Israeli, everyone who has anything to do with Israel. It was a shock. But for us, the people of the Negev, it was our homes. So I was working in the hospital, and I lost my colleague, who's an ear, nose, and throat doctor, who was supposed to be on call that day, and called the same morning to his senior doctor saying, "I can't come. I'm in my kibbutz." He was in kibbutz Be'eri. He was working in the clinic there, and said, "I can't come. There's something going on. I may be late a little bit." And he was murdered in the clinic. And I lost Vivian, who we just mentioned, who was a dear mentor and served with me on the board of Ajik Nisped. It's an organization that she founded to help the Bedouin community in the South. And you know, all of my friends, they lost their homes, they lost their friends, their family. My brother lost one of his dear friends. My father lost his friends. It was so. I can't even say it was close to home. It was in home. All the people I work with, all my friends, this is where we live. This is what we call as home. And I was actually watching the recording from what we did a few days after October 7th. And I remembered the feeling like of the anger and the grief that is still there, because it didn't end. The war didn't end. We still have hostages in Gaza. We still have people evacuated from their homes. Avi just talked about he is not able to go back home. So I feel these feelings, in a way, have stayed the same. But I also said that back then that this day and the weeks after that, where we saw, you know, everyone coming together and treating and helping each other and saving lives, Jews and Arabs, that I see this divide not between Jews and Arabs and Israelis and Palestinians, but actually between people who believe that violence is the answer and people who believe that violence, you know, this is what we should do. This is the end game of the goal, and people who believe in peace and humanity and saving lives. And I believe more in that today than I believed it before. And I would say, like, today I feel like I think Sinwar and Netanyahu are working together to keep this war going and to destroy both people. That's how I feel today. But I am very, very lucky and privileged to work with people who are valuing humanity and valuing human lives and social justice. And every day that I am with my community and with you is a day that keeps me hopeful. So these things to me have stayed the same, and even more so, I would say that my belief in social society and the fact that real change comes bottom up, and from citizens, from civilians, from NGOs. We've seen that during the first few weeks and the entire year. So I can tell you that not only that I was working in the hospital, you know, in the ICU and the emergency room in the weeks after October 7th, but I also was a part of some kind of, like, was a natural organization. We were a few doctors that organized this WhatsApp group, one in each hospital, just to locate people who were who we didn't know where they were. I don't know if you remember, in the first few weeks, there was so many people who were missing because it took weeks to identify bodies. People came to the hospital as like John Doe's. And we had no idea. People were looking for their sons and their daughters and their friends and their cousins, and the state failed. The state failed us, and the government failed us in every aspect, military-wise, economically-wise, social services, but the people who kept everything together were actually, you know, the citizens and social organizations and civil society, the people who are, you know, we are supporting as NIF. And it's just, I think I was heartbroken to learn and to see in my own eyes the failure of the government. Not that I, you know, had a lot of faith in it before, but there's some contract between a citizen and their government that they know they'll be there for you in like the most basic things. If it's like healthcare, safety, security, getting people back from enemy lines. And I think we didn't see that in a past year, but we did see the strength of the Israeli society, the Palestinian society within Israel and outside of Israel, taking care of each other, and us being a bridge. So these are things that I believed then, and I still believe now, and I'm hopeful because I really hope that we have an opportunity to change the narrative in a way that maybe we will remember this horrible war as, I don't know, the independence war of the Palestinian state, and maybe a war that brought freedom to the Israeli people and saved them from dictatorship and apartheid. So that at least what stayed the same for me. What has changed is that I have to say, I'm really still surprised that we have 101 hostages in Gaza still. It is unbelievable to me. I see it as a personal failure, you know, of us as an Israeli society, but also some of it, the American administration. I think we should do everything we can to bring them home, and we should do everything we can to stop the war, because the fact that more than 40,000 people were killed in Gaza is yet another terrible thing that I have never thought that we as Israelis and Palestinians are able to do. And I really hope that this will change. And I want to tell you, I think I've also learned to value freedom and what freedom is. And there's a quote by George Orwell from 1984, his magnificent book, that says that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 and 2 is 4. And we feel in Israel in a past year that it's almost impossible to say 2 and 2 is 4. It's impossible to say, I don't want people to be killed. It's impossible to say, I want peace. Peace is like, it's a word that we're not using anymore. And today I understand this is freedom. The fact that I am able to speak up, and I'm going to fight on this right and say, no, killing is bad. And we're not supposed to debate yes or no, are we pro or against raping detainees in State Teman? This is freedom to me, and we don't have that non-Palestine nor in Israel. And this is the real fight. And this is to echo what Avi said, which is extremely important. And that may be the real change in my view, is that I think the real existential threat to mostly the Israeli society, I have to say, I think I feel it more in the Israeli society than I do with the Palestinians. The real existential threat is the moral corruption and the loss of the moral compass, and the idea again that power is the only answer, and that violence is the only answer. we know now that violence brings more violence, and that eventually power corrupts. And I am, to be honest, like, I am more worried about my Israeli Jewish friends and what will happen to them from this war, because the discourse is very much not a liberal and a progressive one that we were used to. However, I promise to stay, to keep the hope. So I will say that another thing that changed that my last comment, I will say, despite this very, very dark day and maybe not so optimistic comments that I've said, that another thing that have changed with me is that I don't self-censor myself anymore. So I feel like if it doesn't make sense to me that Ben-Gvir can host a conference that will be hosted in like Israeli mainstream media about transferring Palestinians away and like actually having some kind of like final solution. And I won't be able to speak up and say, no, we want peace, and peace is the only thing that will bring safety and security, and I want the war to end. So I actually take every opportunity I can to talk about these things, talk about my experience, bring this idea that is not mine. Like, it's not unheard of. Yes, that peace agreements bring safety and security. But we need more. We need more of you, and we need you to spread the word too. And we're starting to do it in NIF. And I think that the strategic shift that NIF is doing is actually a historic one, that is also saying, we want political imagination. If we want safety and security, we have to go back to basics and say we believe in equality and freedom and peace, and bring peace back to the public discourse. And we've seen it beautifully in July 1st, in one of the biggest conferences that supports peace in Israel, that it basically brought together thousands of people. And if you would ask me, I don't know, 2 years ago, if I thought this can happen, I would tell you no. But to be honest, like, war is the greatest change agent. And I feel that something is shifting in the Israeli opinion and view. And we have to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity and shift it towards peace and humanity and safety for all of us.
Amen. From your mouth to the ears upstairs. Thank you so much, Yasmeen. And I think you both did such a beautiful job of actually articulating what the North Star is. The us and them that we grew up on isn't true. And two peoples are living on the land and nobody's going anywhere. So I want to, before I hand it back over to Daniel for closing remarks, I want to thank you both for sharing what you shared today and what you shared a year ago. It's an honor to be in the work with you. And I also, after we hear from Daniel, I'll just lead us in a second moment of silence before we leave the call. Daniel?
Thanks, Libby, and thanks, Yasmeen and Avi. Look, all I want to say is I feel like for many of us, and I hope for all of you, for the hundreds of NIFers who are on this call, this last year has been a time where we feel so helpless and so lost and awful. But you have, through your work with New Israel Fund, really exercised an agency that I feel like is a blessing at a time like this, when we don't feel like there's anything we can do. And you heard a bit from Avi and from Yasmeen and earlier from me about what's happening on the ground. The fact is, well, you can't say it any better than Heschel, right? Despair is a luxury that the Jews cannot afford. And so all we can do now is to keep working for that horizon, for that vision that our dear friends just described for us. And I want to thank you all for being not just allied, but instrumental in doing that work on the ground. And we really, truly cannot do any of this without the community that's represented on this call. So thank you.
All right. So let's have a moment of silence again for those lives lost and for a recommitment to fighting for those still living. Thank you, everyone. Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova, and to better days ahead.
Thanks all.
Thank you.